Thank you so much for joining us on SABC News. Now, what are the possible next steps for President Zuma following today's judgment? Can he appeal this judgment?
Hi, good evening. Yes, well, theoretically, you can appeal it. You will first have to ask for leave to appeal from Judge Dunstan Malambo in the Pretoria High Court. And I think if one has regard to the judgment handed down, he's definitely not going to grant him leave to appeal, in which case he will then be able to petition the Supreme Court of Appeal in Bloemfontein in an attempt to convince them to allow him to appeal. But once again, I think the judgment handed down today is very sound, and I don't think there's any reasonable prospects of a success on appeal. But given the track record of the President, I don't think we should be too surprised if he does appeal.
Now, another element to this were, of course, the costs. Now, what should we make of the court orders for the President to pay for the cost of the recent challenge?
Well, he's, of course, the President of the country, and one would expect that, if he is involved in a court case and there are costs awarded, that it would be the taxpayer who pays those costs. But very damning today, Judge Dunstan Malambo saying that he himself must personally be held liable for the cost, not the presidency, not the ANC, but he himself. So, just a further indication that the court found that his application to have the Public Protector's report reviewed and possibly set aside was a frivolous one at the very least, and that it was indeed reckless of him to do it. There was never any chance of it succeeding, and he should never have wasted so many costs, by pursuing that. Remember that there were 7 respondents in this matter, and they all opposed his review application, and thus he is going to pay the costs of all those parties. I did read a estimation today, and it could be along the lines of between 4 and 6 million rand, which is certainly, a deterring factor for any would-be vexatious litigants.
Now, Ulrich, something that we've seen recently coming out of various political spheres is the notion of court overreach. What's your take on that?
Well, I think that, the courts, the High Court of South Africa, and the Supreme Court of Appeal and the Constitutional Court have taken it upon themselves to ensure that our constitutional rights of society are entrenched, and that bad leadership and corruption must be stamped out in this country. There's obviously the argument of the separation of powers, and that the judiciary must be independent and it cannot overreach into the duties of the executive and all of that. But if the President is dissatisfied with that, then he's free to approach the Constitutional Court, which is the highest court, and which is there to ensure that the constitutional rights remain entrenched. And if there is a case of overreaching, then the Constitutional Court will deal with that. I don't think it's overreaching. I think that the courts have a very important task at hand, and that is to ensure that the rights of society as entrenched in our Constitution are at all times adhered to. And if the Public Protector, who is there to ensure that corruption within state organs is stamped out, does compile a report and it does implicate certain people, then those suggestions and the findings of the report must be adhered to. It's not overreaching, in my opinion, at all.
Ulrich, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us on SABC News. That was Ulrich Roux, a legal expert, joining us on that state capture inquiry judgment from earlier today.